Bonjour, and welcome to Canada, home of moose, Mounties, maple syrup, and one of the fastest circuits on the F1 calendar. And F1 Brake Check is here to make sense of it all. From the rain, to the sun, to the groundhogs, we'll cover it all. Corey and I will give you a brief history of the Canadian Grand Prix. We'll have a mildly interesting new tech corner. Corey will tear through my gray matter with more Stump the Pundit trivia, and we'll talk about the Canadian Grand Prix in depth. So settle in, you hosers. F1 Brake Check is at full throttle.
Welcome. You are listening to F1 Brake Check, the epic podcast for all things Formula One, where we discuss technology, history, news, and perspective. With your hosts, Scott Vick and Corey Broom.
We're back with F1 Brake Check. With me, as always, is my co-host for life, Corey Broom. Corey, how are you doing this week, sir?
Fantastic. Had a great weekend. Monday's shaping up. Great weekend. It was really relaxing. And, Monday so far is shaping up to be a pretty good week. How about you?
Yeah, very cool. Weekend? Yeah, pretty chill weekend. Not a lot going on. Can't complain too much. Not as bad a Monday as I've had for the last couple weeks. So yeah, all in all, it was a pretty good start to the week. So I'm looking forward to it. All right, then. So it's time for our history of the Canadian Grand Prix. So for over half a century, the Canadian Grand Prix has been one of the premier events on the Formula One calendar. With history steeped in tradition, the track is renowned for its challenging layout, enthusiastic crowds, the wall of champions, and its unpredictability. The roots can be traced back to 1961 when the first race bearing the title of Grand Prix was held at Mosport Park, located near Toronto. This event, however, was not part of the Formula One World Championship. It wasn't until 1967 that the inaugural F1 Canadian Grand Prix took place at Mosport Park as part of the World Championship. It quickly gained a reputation for its challenging nature with its mix of high-speed straights, elevation changes, and tight corners. In 1968, the race alternated between Mosport Park and Mount Tremblant, a picturesque circuit located about an hour and a half north of Montreal. This period was marked by fierce competition and showcased the growing popularity of F1 in North America. However, due to safety concerns and logistical challenges, Mont Tremblant hosted its last Grand Prix in 1970, making Mosport Park the sole venue until 1977. A pivotal moment in the history of the Canadian Grand Prix came in 1978 when the race moved it to its new home in Ile Notre Dame in Montreal. The circuit was later renamed Circuit Gilles Villeneuve in honor of the beloved Canadian driver who tragically lost his life in 1982. Villeneuve's victory at the inaugural Montreal race in 1978 was a watershed moment as he became the first Canadian to win the Grand Prix on home soil. His aggressive driving style and charismatic personality endeared him to fans worldwide, cementing his legacy in F1 history. The Montreal circuit itself became a favorite among drivers and fans alike, known for its unique layout that includes long straights, tight chicanes, and a picturesque setting along the St. Lawrence River. The Wall of Champions at the final chicane, named after the many drivers who have crashed into it, adds an element of uncertainty and excitement to the race. The 1980s saw the rise of turbocharged engines in F1, and the Canadian Grand Prix played a significant role in this era. The circuit's layout, favoring powerful engines in the high-speed sections, provided a perfect stage for the turbocharged cars to showcase their performance. This period witnessed dominant performances from drivers like Nelson Piquet and Alain Prost. One of the most memorable races during this period was the 1988 Canadian Grand Prix. McLaren's Ayrton Senna and Alain Prost were locked in a fierce battle throughout the season, and Senna's victory in Montreal was a testament to his exceptional driving skills, and when tallied as one of his 6 wins that year, secured his first world championship. The late 1990s and early 2000s were dominated by one man, Michael Schumacher. The German driver's era of dominance extended to the Canadian Grand Prix, where he claimed 7 victories between 1994 and 2004. Schumacher's success at Circuit Gilles Villeneuve was a combination of his unparalleled skill, the reliability of his Ferrari, and the strategic brilliance of his team. However, Schumacher was not without his failings as well. In 1999, for example, a series of crashes at the Wall of Champions eliminated several top contenders, including Schumacher, reigning world champion Jacques Villeneuve, son of Gilles Villeneuve, and 1996 world champion Damon Hill. This incident cemented, pun intended, the Wall's notorious reputation in F1 folklore. The Canadian Grand Prix continued to evolve in the modern era of Formula One with new technological advancements and changing regulations. The race remained a popular fixture on the calendar, known for its unpredictable weather and strategic challenges. In 2011, the Grand Prix produced one of the most thrilling races in F1 history. Jenson Button, driving for McLaren, won after starting from 7th on the grid and making 6 pit stops. The race, which lasted over 4 hours due to rain delays, featured numerous lead changes and dramatic moments, culminating in Button's last lap overtake of Sebastian Vettel. The Canadian Grand Prix also faced its share of challenges. In 2009, the race was temporarily dropped from the F1 calendar due to financial disputes, but returned in 2010 after an agreement was reached between Bernie Ecclestone and the organizers. The event's organizers have since worked to ensure the race's stability and popularity, investing in state-of-the-art infrastructure and ultimate fan experiences. In recent years, the Canadian Grand Prix has continued to provide memorable moments. Lewis Hamilton has enjoyed significant success in Montreal, tying Michael Schumacher's record of 7 victories at the circuit. His performances, along with those of rising stars like Max Verstappen, have kept the excitement and competitiveness of the race alive. The Canadian Grand Prix holds a special place in the hearts of F1 fans and drivers alike. As F1 continues to evolve and grow, the Canadian Grand Prix remains a beloved and enduring part of the sport's rich history, promising more thrilling races and historic achievements for another half a century and beyond.
Yeah, one of the facts that they were talking about during the race, I didn't realize that Schumacher and Hamilton are tied in pole positions. So if he would have gotten this pole position, and he was actually very close, he would have been the leader. But he's tied right now with Schumacher. Yeah, I thought that was interesting. But it's such a great track. Everybody loves this track. It's so fun.
It is. It's a great track. It's fast, but it's very challenging for the drivers. And one of the things that they did this year, because as was noted several times during the telecast, the track was completely resurfaced between last year's Grand Prix and this year's Grand Prix. But one of the things that, in addition to resurfacing the entire track, they also took away a lot of the asphalt runoff areas and converted them back to grass. I think that the addition of the grass areas back to the circuit Gilles Villeneuve was really a step in the right direction. The drivers had a tendency to hang it out, if you will, a little more with the safety of having that asphalt area, that it gives them more of a kind of a visual cue of, hey, maybe I need to get on the binders a little bit quicker. All right, so shall we move on to our tech corner?
Yeah, let's move on.
All right, so a few weeks ago, we devoted an entire tech corner to discussing the changes coming to the power units in 2026. It was part of our larger discussion about engines and power units in Formula One. So if you haven't already listened to it, go back and check them out. So this week, the FIA released the final 2026 regulations regarding chassis to great fanfare. The chassis regulations will significantly change the look of the chassis and will include changes aimed at making the racing more exciting. This week, Corey and I will discuss the new rules and how they will affect the future of the sport we all love.
So what are some of the more significant changes that we can look forward to in 26?
The first and largest change is they are trying to make the cars much more quote unquote nimble. As we discussed last week during the preview for Canada and also in previous shows, that the cars have gotten much, much larger than they were back in like the 80s, 90s, and the early 2000s, which has led to, I think, especially depending upon the track, it's led to some very boring races. They're trying to make the cars go back more towards those earlier Formula One cars, but it will also introduce, for the first time since the 60s, it's introducing active aero. They're changing a lot about the weight and dimensions of the cars. They're making other aerodynamic changes. They're making changes to the tires. They're pretty sweeping changes. And the FIA, when they released the rules, they released some renderings of kind of what they think the cars might look like for 2026 and beyond.
Nice. So yeah, I saw that DRS is basically going to be dead in 26. Can you talk a little bit more about the active aero and what that really entails?
So the active aero is basically just like what it says. So back in the 60s, when aerodynamics really started to come into play in Formula One. Some of the teams experimented what was referred to as active aerodynamics, which meant that the wings could actually move at different times on the track. Some of them were done by actuators. Some of them were done just simply by where the car was located at on the track. They actually had wings that would actually move and reposition themselves during the course of the lap. And because of the unreliability of the active aero, then where there was a lot of very well documented accidents that were caused by these aerodynamic elements being able to change during the course of a corner and stuff, and then they would suddenly fail and cause pretty horrific accidents.
Right.
Active aerodynamics was banned from the being used by the cars. And when we talk about active aerodynamics, I kind of touched on it a little bit, that it's just the ability to change the aerodynamics of the car while it's out on track. Under the current rules, the aerodynamics can only be changed in the pit. Now, we do kind of have a faux active aero in the fact that the wings, but they're only allowed a certain amount of flexion right now in the wing angles. The new active aero rules, there's going to be two different modes. There's going to be a Z mode and an X mode. The X mode is going to be for straights, where it's much more of a low downforce configuration. So think of it as kind of like a much more intricate or a much more dynamic DRS that'll be available on all straightaways. And there won't be just DRS zones where it'll be allowed. They'll be able to use it at any straightaway point on the track. And then they'll also have what they're calling Z mode, which is more of a high downforce configuration that will be for corners.
As you're talking through that, I'm thinking how much the drivers have to go through today as far as manual setup, and as they're going through all the different modes they go through. And then on top of this, now they also have active arrows. So it's going to be interesting how they can adjust to this.
It's going to make the drivers' mistakes much more magnified.
Last week, you mentioned about how the cars are going to be about 3 feet or a meter shorter. So what are the new dimensions, and are there any weight implications into this as well?
Well, actually, first of all, I do have to make a correction in the fact that I thought I had read somewhere that they were going to make the cars almost a meter shorter. Turns out that is not the case. They did go for a much smaller change. The new overall length of the car will go from the current wheelbase is set at a maximum of 3,600 millimeters or 3.6 meters. The new regulations will be 200 millimeters shorter. So, or for those of you who, like me, didn't really pay much attention when they were teaching the metric system here in America, 200 millimeters is about 8 inches. So we're talking a difference of about that much. For those who are not watching on video, I'm holding my fingers up, about 8 inches apart. So it's not going to be a huge difference as far as the overall length, but it will make the cars a little bit shorter. Also, the overall weight of the cars will also be reduced by 30 kilograms. So which is a pretty significant amount of weight. So all these changes should make the cars much more like early 2000 iteration of the cars. It should make them much more nimble.
With that weight reduction, how's it going to affect tires? I mean, surely they have to be updated as well.
But actually, there's also going to be some changes to the tire rules themselves. So the front tires are now going to be 25 millimeters or 2.5 centimeters, which is not a huge difference, but the front tires are going to be 25 millimeters more narrow, and the rear tires are going to be, they're going to take 30 millimeters off the rear tires. By reducing the width of the tire, that's going to it's going to reduce the amount of grip on the cars themselves, but it will also take and reduce the rolling drag coefficient, which should help the electrified part of the power unit. It's not going to sap as much power from them by having these more narrow tires.
That makes sense. Yeah. What other aero changes? So if we're looking at much lighter cars and we're looking at different tires and things like that, what other aero changes are we looking at there?
Well, the two probably biggest changes to the aero outside of the active aerodynamics is one is they are reducing some of the sculpting, if you will. I'm doing the air quotes right here that the teams have done with the introduction of the ground effects. So right now, if you go and Google Checo's Red Bull from Monaco last year, where the car was hoisted up in the air, and we got a really good look at the underside of the car. The bottom of the car is going to be much flatter than the current iteration. The ground effects will still be there, but they're not going to be able to sculpt a lot of the tuning vanes and things like that. The Venturi tunnels that are used for the ground effects will be much smoother, for lack of a better term, and much less sculpted. So it will make the bottom of the floor much flatter. I mean, it's not going to be anywhere close to being as flat as they were pre-ground effects, where they literally were flat with the exception of the 10 millimeter plank running right down the middle that actually stuck down and from the floor. But they will be a pretty significant changes to the floor itself. And then the other thing too is that's going to be a big reduction in is the size of the rear diffusers. So right now,
wow.
the rear diffusers are huge and they're like super sculpted and everything in order to manage the air. They're reducing the size of the diffuser, which should take and help with the aerodynamics of cars following each other. So it should reduce the amount of dirty air coming off of the cars, but it will also reduce the downforce in the rear as well. For one, you're not going to have as much downforce being generated by the diffuser like what we have now. Also, because they are eliminating the beam wing, which is the lower element of the rear wing, that they would produce a lot of downforce by directing the air that was coming out of the diffuser over the beam wing to take and generate a lot of downforce on the rear end. All in all, it's going to reduce the overall downforce of the car.
I've seen some articles on the manual override. Can you explain that a little bit better?
The way you kind of have to think of it is for those who are familiar with IndyCar on road courses have a system that they refer to as push to pass, which is where they can press a button on the steering wheel. They can't use it on restarts. They can't use it at the start of a race, but during a race, all the drivers have what's called push to pass, which is, like I said, is where they can push a button on the steering wheel. And as long as they're holding it, they can get upwards of a 20-second boost in horsepower.
Like
now,
right?
That's exactly what it is. What it does is it takes and increases the amount of turbo power available to the engine, which increases the horsepower. They are limited in the amount of push to pass that they have during the course of a race.
Yeah.
The thing is that with the manual override that Formula One is introducing, this is part of the increased size of the power unit generation in the kinetic energy recovery system. And what this will do is it will be another button on the steering wheel that the drivers can push at any point. The way that I read the articles and the release from the FIA is this will be kind of like the DRS system in the fact that they will only be able to deploy the manual override when they're following another car. It's almost like a DRS system. But what this will do is this will allow them to completely drain the electrical system and send all of that power from the KERS system into the electrical motors that sit inside of the transmission to increase the wheels rotation to give them that extra power boost. The manual override system will only be limited by how efficient the kinetic energy recovery system works, or the MGUK, how efficient it is at harvesting power back into the electrical system. That will be the only limitation for the manual override, at least because that's the way that I read it. I still need to see some final clarification on it. Now it's time for our favorite part of the show, where Corey is going to try to scramble up my brain matter in our segment we call Stump the Pundit. So Corey, what kind of trivia question do you have for me this week?
I'm moving away from what we were doing before, where I was really concentrating on the drivers that were on the grid today. So I'm really just reaching all over historically and really not going too far. Asked a question about Mark Webber last time. So Mark Webber left at the end of 2023. After that, he went to another race. Do you know what racing series he went to?
It was the Porsche Cup, if I remember correctly. It was something to do with Porsche, and I want to say it was the Porsche Cup.
It's so close. So he did race for Porsche. It was Le Mans.
Okay, so the World Endurance Championship?
Yep, exactly. Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So you were there, man, right there. Michael Schumacher's brother.
Ralph.
Who did he race for?
Let's see. He started his career, if I remember correctly, he started with Jordan, spent some time with Williams.
James Hunt. So for those that are new to F1, hopefully you've seen the movie Rush. One of the people that it was about is James Hunt. So James Hunt.
Hunt the Shunt.
What year did he win the championship?
1976.
Yep, on the dot. When was Webber born? Mark Webber. What year?
Oh, Mark Webber. 1983. Somewhere in there.
Same year, 1976.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't think Webber was that old.
Yeah, I know, right?
Okay. I'm 52, and I was thinking that Webber was about 10 years younger than I am.
Okay, last question. Formula One's cockpit, the walls themselves, has to impact an impact of how many tons?
I think it's 10 tons. I think is the number.
250 tons.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I did not know
think
that.
About it. They're going so fast, man. They have to be able to withstand that.
That's true.
And that's it for Stump the Pundit.
All right, then. Well, let's get into the weekend recap then. This year's edition of the Canadian Grand Prix had it all. And I do mean it had it all. So it was super fascinating. Started off the weekend on Friday with a rain-shortened FP1. First time I can remember in a very, very long time where they actually started the timer on the session, but they didn't actually open the pit lane until probably about 15 minutes into the session, which I thought was really, really interesting.
Yeah.
Lando leads the first practice. And then on the second practice on a dried out track, surprise, surprise, Lewis Hamilton tops the speed charts. I could not get over that.
He was a monster.
Front wing.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. It was just incredible. You and I both thought that Mercedes would not have a very good weekend this weekend, simply just because of all the problems that they've had with the car. But they brought the updated wing last time around in Monaco. They only had one copy of the wing, and George Russell ran it during the race. Because of the low speed nature of Monaco, that wing didn't really get to show off what it could do. And now both Mercedes had that updated wing this weekend, and it has made a dramatic improvement. The cars seem to be much more stable, and both Russell and Hamilton look tremendously much more comfortable.
It was really enjoyable to see how much better Hamilton was. Russell led for quite a bit of the race.
And I do have to make a correction. I had them mixed up that Fernando Alonso led FP2 and Lewis led FP3 going into qualifying. Then we get into qualifying, which that was just a barnstormer. It was so awesome. Watching qualifying was so much fun. We had a lot of surprises with qualifying. We had George Russell and Max Verstappen set for the first time in almost 20 years. Actually, I think it was more than 20 years. It was the first time that since Formula One started timing lap times down to the thousandth of a second, it was the first time that we had two cars qualify at exactly the same time. I mean, down to the thousandth of a second.
I know.
Max
Isn't that crazy?
Verstappen, it is. So Max Verstappen and George Russell posted the exact same time in Q3 at 1 minute, 12 seconds flat. both of the Mercedes looked very, very strong. I mean, even Lewis in qualifying, even in Q2, I mean, he looked really close. It just seemed that he tried to push the car just a little bit too hard in Q3, which is kind of what dropped him down in the order to his eventual 7th place qualifying. We had the McLaren duo came, finished qualifying in 3rd and 4th. And then, surprise, surprise, as if he's been listening to us, Danny Rick takes it and just storms to a just super qualifying effort, qualifies 5th for the race. Other than the one qualifying that he had for the sprint at China, we haven't seen Danny look this good in quite a while. And he looked really good all weekend long.
He did. You're hoping it's not a fluke?
Yeah, in 2 weeks in Spain, definitely have a much better idea of whether this was a fluke or he takes a step back, or whether this is, a harbinger of things to come.
Let's hope so.
Alonso also had a really fantastic qualifying.
Yeah.
He finishes 6th, right behind Danny Rick. Also, Yuki continued his tremendous qualifying effort in qualifying 8th. Lance Stroll, hometown hero this weekend, had a really good qualifying as well and ended up qualifying 9th. And then we had another couple surprises down the grid. Alex Albon rounds out the 10th place for Q3, but then his teammate Logan Sargent had the best qualifying that he's had this season, and probably the best qualifying he's had since the Dutch Grand Prix last year, in the fact that he qualifies 13th and was really, really close making it out of Q2 and into Q3. The Haas's during qualifying were kind of, and we'll get to the Haas race performance here in a minute, but even their qualifying was really good. Magnussen looked really good. He looked more like the K-Mag of old, made it into Q2, had a really solid run during qualifying. Hulkenberg had some issues and everything, which relegated him out in Q1. But all in all, Haas had a pretty good weekend, and they had an even better race. The Alpines, they didn't look great in qualifying. And of course, poor Saubers. I hate to kick them when they're down. But Sauber just again had another miserable qualifying.
Yeah, it was yet another forgettable weekend for them.
We get to race day. The skies open up, and it just dumps on the track. Now, one of the things was, we mentioned a little bit ago that the track was resurfaced during the off season, and it was providing tremendous amount of grip, but they still, apparently there was a few spots where the drainage was not great. Basically, the sun comes out at the circuit and it dries up in about 10 minutes.
Yeah, I know.
And even without the sun out, the racing line dried out just ridiculously fast.
So many teams were thinking, well, is it time now to go to slicks? And timing that was just perfect, especially on the Red Bull side. It was just down to, you had to get that right, because if not, you were not going to win that race. You were going to lose many places because of your strategy. And, Red Bull definitely nailed it. Mercedes did a fantastic job with their strategy as well.
They did. The race starts in wet conditions. Both Haas cars end up starting from the pit because they decided at the last minute to change their rear wings. So under the Parc Fermé rules, changing out the rear wing relegated both of them to starting from the pit lane. So we get the start of the race, and as Martin Brundle put it, the way they trundled off of the line trying to reduce the wheel spin, it was like you almost needed a calendar to take time the race pace down to the first corner. But all of the teams decided to start, instead of starting on full wets, they all started on intermediates. With the exception of Haas, who, because they were already starting from the pit lane, they decided to start on the full wet tires, figuring that they could take advantage of the significantly wet conditions, and it paid off for them big time. Starting from the pit lane, Kevin Magnussen was actually able to work his way all the way up to 4th place. Yeah. He actually passed everyone up to and including Oscar Piastri in the much, much faster McLaren, but on the intermediates, versus the full wets in the opening stages. And then Magnussen came in, and poor K-Mag.
I know.
They weren't ready for him with the intermediate tires when he came in, and it just was a disastrous pit stop. I forgot what the timing on it was, but I want to say it was somewhere in the 9-10 second range because of because they cocked it up and weren't ready
Right.
for him. There was speculation that at first that K-Mag made the call and came into the pit, and that was why they weren't prepared for him. But no, the team is the one who called him in. Just apparently the pit wall didn't relay the message to the garage. So poor K-Mag takes and he loses out and slips back to I want to say it was something like 14th or 15th position.
It was way outside of the points.
Yeah, unfortunately for him. But then, like you said, the rain stops, the track starts to dry out, and on the intermediates, Lando goes on a tear. And as the track is drying on the first set of intermediates, Lando passes Max Verstappen and George Russell and actually leads the Grand Prix for a little while.
Yeah, it was looking like another Miami win for a little bit.
Yeah, but unfortunately, unlike Miami, where the timing of the safety car really kind of made it perfect for conditions for him to take and be able to take the restart and walk away from Max, this time he got caught out by the safety car, unfortunately, and just a little bit of a fumble on that. Otherwise, we probably would be talking about him having won instead of Max this weekend. But like we said, Max takes the win. Lando winds up in second, and George Russell has a really entertaining, really exciting battle with Lando for second place, but he ends up finishing in third. But it was just a fantastic podium for Russell for all of the effort for Mercedes this weekend and everything. It came out just a fantastic result for them. We even talked about it a couple weeks ago during the podcast. We had talked about how long are we going to have to continue to make excuses for them? And right now it's looking like we don't need to make excuses for them anymore. Now, again, this is going to be one of those things. Is it just Canada just happened to work out in their favor and they're going to take a step back? Or are we going to start seeing them be much more of a presence at the top end of the grid going into Spain and everything? So I think next weekend, not this weekend, but next weekend when we get to Spain, I think that's going to be very, very telling.
Exactly. Yeah, then we'll know whether or not we need to start making excuses or not.
Yeah, absolutely. Or go back to making excuses.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah.
So also great result this weekend for Aston Martin. Fernando comes home sixth and Lance Stroll comes in seventh right behind him. He was only I'm looking at the timing chart right now, and he was only about 5 seconds behind Alonso.
Yep.
So he kept his nose clean. Danny Rick, he kept the race mistake-free. He succumbed to the superior pace of the Aston Martins. Still ends up coming home in eighth, gets his first points for the season. All in all, really good weekend for Danny Rick.
Very good. Yeah. Yeah. Again, I'm hoping it's not a fluke. I'm hoping he's able to pull this through and we can see an improved Danny Rick for the next several races, hopefully to the end of the year. But, we'll see. He looked really good.
And then the two Alpines, they both had a pretty lackluster qualifying, ends up rounding out the points in 9th and 10th. So, I mean, for what it looked like the weekend was going to provide by the end of qualifying, ended up paying off for them in the long runs. It was a pretty good weekend for Alpine.
Really was. And those are such needed points for them right now, too.
And even despite Ocon's 5 grid spot penalty in qualifying for his launching himself into the stratosphere or fairly close to the stratosphere at Monaco, he ran a clean race, didn't get his elbows out quite as far. And Haas, despite their gamble, even though they didn't come home in the points, they were right there. 11
really
to 12.
Good though.
So for having started from the pit lane, having slid back in the order, the Haas's looked really, really solid in race trim, which is something the last few years we haven't been able to say about Haas.
Not at all. No, this is really the first year that we can actually say that Haas is really looking good. They're really improving, and the drivers look solid. The car is finally starting to get there. Their strategies are starting to make sense now. It's really starting to all gel.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The new leadership seems to be already paying dividends. And finally, the second to last finisher on Sunday, we got to pour one out for Yuki. He had a good qualifying, but he made a mistake in the late stages of the race, went off, and then by the time he was actually able to safely rejoin, he had dropped all the way down to 14th place, which first time since China that he hasn't scored points. It was a very uncharacteristic mistake by Yuki. From what we've seen this year, this is way more of an outlier than the norm. So I think Yuki will learn from the mistake, and I think we'll definitely see him bounce back at Spain.
Yeah, I totally agree. Just misjudgment on the water.
That's exactly it. Yeah, because we got a couple little showers during the course of the race and everything that kind of upended a few things. We got to get down into the melee, if you will. We have been singing Ferrari's praises for the last few weeks because Fred has done such a tremendous job. Charles and Carlos have been doing an absolutely phenomenal job of driving. The team has done a fantastic job of nailing the strategy. This weekend was just an absolute disaster. We can't say that it was a disaster for the same reasons that we would have said even a year ago, 2 years ago. It wasn't bad strategy. It wasn't horrible driving. Carlos and Albon tangled up, knocked both of them out of the race. But that was just a racing incident. As we've talked about before, everybody, no matter how reliable the cars have gotten over the last 15, 20 years or so, we've talked about this on a number of times because I've been watching Formula One long enough that I can remember times where even the top runners would have a number of reliability issues over the course of the season. And the cars are much, much more reliable than they were 20 years ago. But you still get mechanical gremlins. And unfortunately, one of those gremlins caught out Charles Leclerc. He went from the high of winning the crown jewel in Monaco to nosediving. He was losing so much time out there. You got to feel for the guy.
Fortunately enough, he hasn't been bitten by this as he has in the past, not nearly as much as he was in the past. How about that? And Ferrari wanted to keep him out. They thought that they had resolved the issue when he came in for a pit stop, and it just didn't happen. So he had to retire the car.
Yep, just ended up being terminal. And like I said, you really got to feel for the guy because like you said, Ferrari's done so much better a job with the reliability of the cars and the power units and everything that this is now has become so much more the exception rather than the norm.
Yeah, exactly.
And it just so happened to catch him out at this time.
Right.
We got to talk about Checo.
Oh, yeah.
Before the weekend started, we get news that Checo gets an extension at Red Bull. You think that the weight would be off of his shoulders.
Yeah.
You would think that you would have had a much better showing this weekend. And a second weekend in a row that he doesn't even get out of Q1 and ends up with a DNF on the weekend. I'm flabbergasted. I'm hoping that now maybe it was just bad luck this weekend. I'm really hopeful that we'll see another bounce back from Checo when we get to Spain.
Yeah, exactly.
Last but not least, we got to talk about poor Logan. We were singing his praises just a little bit ago about how great his run was in qualifying. Martin Brundle was talking about during the Sky Sports telecast where it's like you've got some drivers that love to drive in the rain and they're really, really good in the rain. And then there are some drivers that when the conditions are wet, they don't have that comfort level. And I think that that's what we've seen that again with Sargent. I mean, the same thing happened at the Dutch Grand Prix in Zandvoort last season. He gets into Q3 and then the rain starts to come down before he is able to get back to the pits and he ends up crashing out, winds up in 10th during qualifying, but doesn't even post a time. Same thing that happened this weekend is he had two separate incidents and the second time he ends up losing the rear wing of the car and he's done for the day, 23 laps in.
Yep. It was just one small mistake that he did. He put too many tires or he put two tires on the wet and it was an ice rink at that point for him. He was just along for the ride.
Exactly. He was just a passenger.
Exactly right. Such a heartbreak too, because he had such a good qualifying. He looked solid all weekend.
With the changing conditions, at one point, Logan was even at the top of the time charts in FP. And by a considerable margin, not just by a little bit. I mean, by like a second and a half.
Right.
The Williams looked really good. Like you said, it was one of those things that he caught the water just right.
Yeah.
And away you go. And it was just one of those mistakes. And sometimes the rain can make you a superstar and sometimes it can make you look like a schmuck.
Right. Right, exactly. So is that it?
I think that's it. So shall we bring it home?
Yeah, I think we're good.
All right. So to paraphrase Canada's second most popular band, we fought the good fight, but it's time for us to pack up our mittens, umbrella, and toques and get on up out of here. Join us next week when we'll get you ready for the Spanish Grand Prix and dissect the latest rumors. We'll have a tribute to another great driver from F1's history book. Hint, he was the subject of one of the greatest racing movies ever. Corey will once again attempt to fry my cranium with more Stump the Pundit trivia and lots more. So until next time, he's Corey, I'm Scott, we are the pundits of F1 Brake Check. Let's go!
Thank you for listening to F1 Brake Check. If you have enjoyed what you heard, don't miss a single episode by hitting that subscribe button in your favorite podcatcher, or you can watch the video version on YouTube. Help us grow by sharing us with your friends and fellow F1 fans. You can contact us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, TikTok and X at F1 Brake Check. Our website is f1brakecheck.com, where you will find links to all our content. We value your passion and your feedback, so please take a moment to review our podcast. Your reviews help us grow and improve, and it means the world to us. Share your thoughts, rate us, and let us know how we can make the show experience even better. F1 Brake Check is a production of Brake Check Media. For your hosts Scott Vick and Corey Broom, until next time, keep yourself inside track limits, and try not to pitch it in the kitty litter.